Tony Bennett adjusted his bow tie one final time as the black Mercedes pulled into the circular driveway of the Hamptons estate. At 97, he had performed at countless weddings, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was the way the invitation had arrived. Hand-delivered by a private courier with no return address, just elegant calligraphy requesting his presence at the marriage of Isabella Marchetti to Jonathan Whitmore III. The fee offered was astronomical, far more than necessary for even the most exclusive wedding performance. The estate was magnificent. 30 acres of manicured lawns rolling down to a private beach, with a mansion that looked like it had been transplanted from a Tuscan hillside. White tents dotted the property, and Tony could see staff members in crisp uniforms, making final preparations for what was clearly going to be the wedding of the year. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. As Tony stepped out of the car, a familiar feeling crept over him. The same instinct that had kept him alive through 7 decades in show business, through the mob-controlled venues of the 1950s, through the cutthroat politics of the entertainment industry. Something was wrong here. Something was being hidden behind all this expensive perfection. Mr. Bennett! A young woman in an elegant bridesmaid dress rushed toward him, her face lighting up with genuine excitement. "I'm Isabella, Bella, the bride. I can't believe you're actually here. When my father said he had arranged for you to perform, I thought he was joking." Tony took her hand gently, immediately charmed by her warmth and obvious joy. Isabella Marchetti was beautiful in the way that money could enhance but never create. Natural grace, intelligent eyes, and a smile that seemed to illuminate everything around her. She was, Tony realized, exactly the kind of young woman whose happiness was worth protecting. "The pleasure is mine, my dear," Tony said. "Your father has exquisite taste in music. I'm honored to be part of your special day." "Actually," Bella said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "I have to confess something. My father never told me how he knows you, or why you agreed to perform at such short notice. He just said it was business from the old days. You know how Italian fathers are. Everything is mysterious business from the old days." Before Tony could respond, a voice called out from across the lawn. "Anthony, my old friend, you look magnificent." Tony turned toward the voice and felt his blood turn to ice water. Walking toward them with arms spread wide in greeting was Salvatore Marchetti, Sal the fish, a man Tony Bennett had hoped never to see again. Sal looked older, greyer, more distinguished in his expensive tuxedo, but those eyes were the same cold, calculating eyes that had haunted Tony's nightmares for 40 years. "Sal," Tony managed, his voice steady despite the shock. "You look well." Sal embraced Tony with the kind of theatrical warmth that barely concealed decades of carefully controlled rage. "It's so wonderful to see you again, Anthony. So wonderful that you could be here for my little girl's wedding. We have so much to catch up on." Bella looked between the two men, sensing undercurrents she couldn't understand. "You two know each other from the old days?" "Oh, yes," Sal said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Anthony and I go way back. Don't we, Anthony? All the way back to 1983. Atlantic City, the Golden Palace Casino. Such memories we share." Tony felt the familiar tightness in his chest that had plagued him for decades whenever someone mentioned Atlantic City. 1983, the year that had changed everything. The year he had been forced to make a choice between his career and his conscience. The year Sal Marchetti's younger brother Vincent had died, and Tony Bennett had played a role in that death that no one else knew about. "Daddy," Bella said, "you're being mysterious again. Why don't you tell me how you really know Mr. Bennett?" Business, sweetheart. Just old business. Nothing for you to worry about on your wedding day. Sal's voice was gentle when he spoke to his daughter, but when his eyes met Tony's again, there was something else there. Something that looked very much like revenge wrapped in 40 years of patience. But here's what Tony Bennett didn't know, what no one at the wedding knew, about Sal Marchetti's real plan for this day. Sal had spent 4 decades planning this moment. Not just planning revenge, but planning the perfect revenge. He could have had Tony killed dozens of times over the years. A heart attack, a car accident, any number of unfortunate incidents that befell people who crossed the Marchetti family. But that would have been too simple, too quick. Sal wanted Tony to suffer the way he had suffered, to lose something precious the way Sal had lost his brother Vincent. And what was more precious to Tony Bennett than his reputation, his legacy, his image as America's beloved crooner, the gentleman of jazz who had somehow managed to maintain his integrity through an industry known for corruption? Sal was going to destroy all of that today, in front of 300 of the most influential people in New York society. He was going to reveal the truth about Atlantic City, about Vincent's death, and about the choice Tony Bennett had made to save his own career. "Anthony," Sal said, steering Tony away from Bella as wedding guests began arriving. "Let me show you where you'll be performing. I've had a special stage constructed just for you." They walked across the lawn toward an ornate bandstand that had been built on a raised platform overlooking the reception area. It was beautiful, but Tony noticed immediately that it was positioned so that every guest would have a clear view of the performer. There would be no shadows to hide in, no way to escape if things went wrong. "This is quite elaborate," Tony said carefully. "Only the best for my daughter's wedding," Sal replied. "And only the best for my old friend Anthony Bennett. You know, I've been looking forward to this day for a very long time. I've been planning exactly what I wanted to say to you when we were finally together again." Tony stopped walking. "Sal, if this is about Vincent—" "Vincent?" Sal's voice was soft, almost gentle. "Oh, Anthony, this is about so much more than Vincent. This is about justice. This is about truth. This is about making sure that everyone here today understands exactly what kind of man they've been admiring all these years." The guests were arriving now. Senators, business leaders, entertainment industry executives, socialites, and journalists. Tony recognized faces from magazine covers and newspaper headlines. If Sal was planning to destroy Tony's reputation, he had assembled the perfect audience to do it. "Sal," Tony said quietly, "your daughter doesn't deserve to have her wedding ruined by something that happened 40 years ago." "You're absolutely right," Sal agreed. "Bella doesn't deserve any of this, just like Vincent didn't deserve what happened to him. But sometimes innocent people get hurt when the truth comes out. That's the price of living with lies for so long." Tony looked across the lawn at Bella, who was greeting guests with radiant happiness, completely unaware that her father was planning to turn her perfect wedding into a public execution. For the first time in 40 years, Tony Bennett was going to have to find a way to protect someone else the way he had failed to protect Vincent Marchetti. "What do you want, Sal?" "I want justice, Anthony. I want the truth, and I want you to be the one to tell it." Sal pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. Inside were photographs, black and white, grainy but unmistakably clear. Tony Bennett, 40 years younger, shaking hands with FBI agents outside the Golden Palace Casino. Vincent Marchetti's body being loaded into an ambulance. Newspaper headlines about the federal investigation that had brought down half the organized crime families on the East Coast. These photos tell an interesting story, don't they, Anthony? About a young singer who was so afraid of losing his career that he made a deal with the federal government. about how that deal led to a raid that got my brother killed, about how Anthony Bennett saved his own skin by betraying the people who had helped make him famous. Tony stared at the photographs, each one a reminder of the worst decision he had ever made. He had been young, scared, and faced with an impossible choice: cooperate with the FBI investigation or see his career destroyed by his connections to organized crime. He had chosen cooperation, told the agents about meetings he had witnessed, conversations he had overheard. He had never intended for anyone to get killed, but Vincent Marchetti had been in the wrong place at the wrong time when the feds raided the Golden Palace Casino. He had tried to run, and in the confusion, he had been shot by an overzealous agent who claimed self-defense. The official investigation cleared the agent. Vincent was buried quietly. The mob connections to the entertainment industry were exposed and dismantled. And Tony Bennett's career had survived, even flourished, because he was seen as clean, one of the few entertainers who hadn't been corrupted by organized crime. "I never intended for Vincent to get hurt," Tony said quietly. "Intentions," Sal said with a bitter smile. "Do you know what Vincent's intentions were that night? He was planning to leave the family business. He had met a girl, a schoolteacher from Brooklyn. He was going to marry her and open a legitimate restaurant. He was in that casino to tell our uncle that he was out, that he wanted no part of the violence and corruption anymore." Tony closed his eyes. He had never known that. In 40 years of carrying guilt about Vincent's death, he had never known that the young man who died had been trying to escape the same world that Tony had been trying to survive. "The wedding starts in an hour," Sal said. "You have until then to decide how you want to tell the story. You can confess everything to my daughter and my guests, take responsibility for your role in Vincent's death, and destroy your reputation voluntarily. Or I can have these photographs distributed to every journalist here, along with federal documents I've obtained that detail your cooperation with the FBI. Either way, the truth comes out today." Tony looked at the photographs one more time, then at Bella across the lawn, still glowing with happiness as she posed for pictures with her bridesmaids. "And if I confess, if I tell the truth about everything, what happens to Bella? What happens to her wedding?" "Bella is strong," Sal said. "She'll survive learning that her wedding was ruined. Vincent didn't survive the consequences of your choices." Tony nodded slowly, understanding that he was trapped as completely as he had been 40 years ago. But with one crucial difference. This time, he wasn't a young man scared for his career. He was 97 years old, with Alzheimer's slowly stealing his memories. His career was behind him. His legacy was established. He had nothing left to lose, except his pride. But Bella Marchetti had everything to lose. Her wedding day, her relationship with her father, her innocence about the world she had been born into. "I'll tell the truth," Tony said finally, "but I want to tell it my way. I want to sing it." Sal looked surprised. "Sing it?" "One song. Let me perform one song that tells the whole story. Then you can do whatever you want with those photographs." For the first time since they had started talking, Sal seemed uncertain. "What song?" "The Way You Look Tonight. The song I was rehearsing the night I met with the FBI agents. The song I was supposed to perform at Vincent's wedding." Sal's face went pale. "Vincent was engaged?" "To Maria Rossetti, the school teacher from Brooklyn. He asked me to perform at their wedding. It was supposed to be in October 1983. Instead, I performed at his funeral." The silence stretched between them like a bridge across 40 years of pain, guilt, and carefully nurtured rage. Finally, Sal spoke. "One song, then we'll see." The next hour passed like a fever dream. Tony watched Bella marry Jonathan Whitmore III in a ceremony that was perfect in every detail. Flowers that looked like they had been painted by Renaissance masters, music performed by a chamber orchestra, vows spoken under an arch of white roses that seemed to glow in the afternoon sunlight. The bride was radiant, the groom was handsome and clearly devoted, and their families looked on with joy and pride. Tony stood in the wings, waiting for his moment, knowing that he was about to shatter this perfect day with the weight of decades-old truth. But as he watched Bella's face during the ceremony, he made a decision that surprised even him. He was going to protect her. Not by running away, not by making excuses, but by taking full responsibility for everything that had happened and making sure that the consequences fell on him alone. After the ceremony, as guests moved to the reception area, Tony took his place on the ornate stage Sal had constructed. The audience settled into their chairs, champagne glasses glittering in the late afternoon sun, expecting to be entertained by America's last great crooner. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tony said into the microphone, his voice carrying clearly across the lawn, "before I begin, I want to thank our hosts for including me in this beautiful celebration. Marriage is about many things: love, commitment, hope for the future. But perhaps most importantly, marriage is about honesty. About two people who choose to see each other clearly and love each other anyway." He paused, looking directly at Sal, who was sitting at the head table with his family, those damning photographs still in his jacket pocket. "Sometimes," Tony continued, "the truth comes at a cost. Sometimes being honest means destroying beautiful illusions. Sometimes it means hurting people we care about. But I've learned something in my 97 years. Lies always cost more than truth, even when the truth is painful." The audience was silent now, sensing that this was more than the usual wedding entertainment. Bella was looking at Tony with curiosity and growing concern. "I'm going to sing for you now," Tony said, "a song about looking at someone you love and choosing to see them clearly, honestly, completely. It's a song about the way we look at each other in moments of truth." The opening notes of "The Way You Look Tonight" began to play, but Tony's arrangement was different from any version he had ever performed. It was slower, more contemplative, filled with pauses that seemed to contain entire conversations. As he sang, Tony told the story, not in words, but in the way his voice carried 40 years of guilt and sorrow. The audience heard about love and loss, about choices that seemed right at the time and wrong in retrospect, about young men who died too early and old men who lived too long with their secrets. When he reached the bridge of the song, Tony looked directly at Bella and sang about innocence and the price of growing up, about fathers who make difficult choices to protect their children, about the way love can twist itself into vengeance without meaning to. And when he finished, there wasn't applause. There was just silence as 300 people processed what they had heard. Not just a song, but a confession, a eulogy, and a plea for forgiveness, all wrapped in melody. Tony set down the microphone and walked directly to Sal's table. In front of everyone, he knelt beside the man who had been his enemy for 40 years. "I'm sorry," Tony said, simply. "I'm sorry for the choice I made. I'm sorry for Vincent. I'm sorry for the pain I caused your family. I can't undo what happened, but I can finally tell the truth about it." Sal stared at Tony for a long moment, his hand still resting on the envelope of photographs that could destroy everything Tony had built. Then he looked at his daughter, who was watching this exchange with growing understanding of things she had never been told about her family's history. "Vincent would have liked this," Sal said finally, so quietly that only Tony could hear him. He always said that the truth was more important than revenge. I never understood what he meant until just now. Sal pulled the envelope from his pocket and handed it to Tony. These belong to you now. Do whatever you think is right with them. Tony took the envelope and, without looking inside, walked to the ornate fountain in the center of the reception area. In front of all the guests, he dropped the envelope into the water and watched as 40 years of secrets dissolved in the chlorinated depths. Ladies and gentlemen, Tony said, returning to the microphone, I want to end this afternoon with a song for the bride and groom. A song about second chances, about choosing love over fear, about the way we look at each other when we finally understand that the truth, however painful, is always better than the most beautiful lie. This time when he sang The Way You Look Tonight, it was a celebration, not just of Bella and Jonathan's marriage, but of the possibility that people could choose forgiveness over vengeance, truth over comfortable deception, love over fear. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous, not because the guests understood everything that had just happened, but because they had witnessed something rare and precious, a moment of genuine human transformation. Later that evening, as the reception wound down and guests began to drift away, Bella approached Tony as he was, packing his music. Mr. Bennett, she said quietly, I don't understand everything that happened here today, but I know my father has been angry about something for my entire life. Tonight, for the first time, I saw him at peace. Whatever you did, whatever you said to him, thank you. Tony looked at this beautiful young woman who had just had her wedding turned into an impromptu therapy session for two old men working through decades of pain, and he was amazed by her grace and maturity. Bella, he said gently, your father is a good man who loved his brother very much. Sometimes good people make bad choices when they're in pain. The important thing is learning to forgive ourselves and each other. Is that what you learned today? Tony considered the question as he closed his music case. Today I learned that the truth really can set you free. It just takes a lot longer than most people think. As Tony's car pulled away from the estate, he saw Sal and Bella walking together on the beach, father and daughter finally talking honestly about things that had been hidden for too long. The wedding had been beautiful, but the real celebration was just beginning. The celebration of a family finally learning to live without secrets. Tony Bennett had come to the Hamptons expecting to perform at a wedding. Instead, he had performed the most important concert of his life, a concert for an audience of two men who needed to learn how to forgive each other and themselves. The music had done what music always did at its best. It had revealed the truth, healed old wounds, and reminded everyone present that love, however complicated, was always stronger than hate. The wedding singer's secret was finally out, and everyone was better for it. Sometimes the most beautiful performances happen not on concert hall stages, but in moments when people choose honesty over safety, forgiveness over revenge, and love over fear. Tony Bennett had spent 70 years learning how to sing. Today, he had finally learned how to tell the truth in song. The Mercedes disappeared into the Hamptons evening, carrying a 97-year-old man who had finally laid down a burden he had been carrying for 40 years. Behind him, a wedding reception continued, but it had become something more. A celebration of the possibility that it's never too late to choose the truth, never too late to ask for forgiveness, and never too late to discover that the people we think are our enemies might just be people who are in as much pain as we are. The wedding singer's secret had become everyone's liberation, and the music played on into the night. But the story of that Hamptons wedding was far from over. 3 days later, Tony Bennett received a phone call that would complete the circle that had begun 40 years earlier in Atlantic City. "Mr. Bennett, this is Maria Rossetti Thompson. I don't know if you remember me, but I was Vincent Marchetti's fiancée back in 1983. Tony nearly dropped the phone. Maria, the schoolteacher from Brooklyn that Vincent had been planning to marry. The woman whose wedding Tony was supposed to perform at before everything went wrong. "Maria," Tony said softly, "of course I remember you. Vincent talked about you all the time. How did you—" "I was at the wedding," Maria said, her voice carrying the weight of 40 years of questions finally being answered. "My niece works for the catering company. She called me when she realized who you were and what had happened during your performance. Mr. Bennett, I need to see you. There are things about Vincent's death that you don't know, things that Sal doesn't know either." They met the next day at a small cafe in Little Italy, the same neighborhood where Vincent Marchetti had grown up, dreaming of legitimate restaurants instead of illegal casinos. Maria was now 67, her dark hair silver, her schoolteacher's bearing still evident in her straight posture and careful speech, but her eyes held the same pain that Tony had been carrying for 4 decades. "Vincent wasn't just trying to leave the family business," Maria began, stirring sugar into her espresso with nervous precision. "He was gathering evidence to give to the FBI. He had been documenting the money laundering operations, the political corruption, everything he had seen since he was 16 years old and forced to work for his uncle." Tony felt the world tilt around him. He was working with the FBI? Not officially. Vincent was planning to approach them after our wedding. He had boxes of documents hidden in our apartment, photographs of meetings, recordings of conversations. He was going to trade all of that information for immunity and a chance to start over somewhere far away from New York. The revelation hit Tony like a physical blow. For 40 years he had believed that his cooperation with the FBI had led to Vincent's death. But Vincent had been planning to do the same thing, and had collected far more damaging evidence than Tony had ever possessed. "Maria," Tony said carefully, "why are you telling me this now?" "Because Vincent left something for you. He knew you were in an impossible position, knew that the FBI was pressuring you to cooperate. He wanted you to know that you weren't alone, that someone understood the choice you had to make." Maria reached into her purse and pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Tony's name was written on it, in handwriting he recognized, Vincent's careful script from the few notes he had seen him write. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a key. "Tony," the letter began, "if Maria is giving you this, it means something has happened to me and you're probably blaming yourself. Don't. The FBI would have raided the Golden Palace with or without your information. I know because I've been planning to give them everything they need to shut down the whole operation." The key opens a safety deposit box at Chase Manhattan. Box 1247. Inside is evidence that will protect both of us if anything goes wrong. If I'm not around to use it, it's yours now. Use it to build the life you deserve. Vincent. Tony stared at the letter, understanding for the first time that Vincent Marchetti had been trying to protect him even as he prepared to expose the same criminal network that Tony was being forced to betray. "The safety deposit box," Maria continued. "It's still there. Vincent had paid the rental fees for 50 years in advance. Inside are documents that prove Vincent was the FBI's real target, not a victim of your cooperation. They wanted his evidence, but they were planning to arrest him anyway, once they had what they needed." "Why didn't you give this to Sal years ago?" "Because Sal wasn't ready to hear it. He needed someone to blame for Vincent's death, and blaming you was easier than blaming the system that had trapped both Vincent and you. But after what happened at Bella's wedding, after seeing him finally, let go of his anger. I think he's ready for the truth. That afternoon, Tony, Maria, and Sal met at the Chase Manhattan Bank in downtown Manhattan. The safety deposit box had been waiting for 40 years, like a time capsule from a different era. Inside were documents that painted a complete picture of FBI operations in the early 1980s, including transcripts of recorded conversations between agents discussing how to manipulate both Tony Bennett and Vincent Marchetti into providing the evidence they needed to bring down the organized crime networks. The documents revealed that the FBI had been monitoring both men for months, waiting for the right moment to pressure them into cooperation. Vincent's death hadn't been the unintended consequence of Tony's cooperation. It had been the unintended consequence of an overzealous federal operation that treated informants as expendable assets rather than human beings deserving protection. "They used us both," Sal said quietly as he read through the transcripts. "They used Vincent, they used Tony, they used all of us. We were just pieces on a chessboard to them." Tony looked at his old enemy across the bank table, finally understanding that they had both been victims of forces larger than their personal choices or failings. "Sal, I want you to have these documents. Do whatever you think is right with them." "What I think is right," Sal said, gathering the papers into a neat pile, "is to make sure that Bella never has to carry the weight of secrets that destroyed 2 generations of our family. I'm going to tell her everything about Vincent, about the FBI, about the choices people make when they're scared and cornered. And then I'm going to burn these documents and let the dead finally rest in peace." Maria smiled, the first genuine smile Tony had seen from her since their meeting began. Vincent would like that. He always said that the truth should serve the living, not punish the dead. 6 months later, Tony Bennett received one more invitation from the Marchetti family. Not to a wedding this time, but to the grand opening of Marchetti's, a legitimate restaurant in Brooklyn run by Bella and her husband Jonathan, with financial backing from Sal and emotional support from Maria, who had become an honorary grandmother to the young couple. The restaurant was everything Vincent Marchetti had dreamed of. Elegant but welcoming, serving authentic Italian food in an atmosphere of warmth and family tradition. Above the bar hung a photograph of Vincent in his Navy uniform, along with a small plaque that read, "In memory of Vincent Marchetti, who believed that the truth was more important than safety and love was more important than revenge." Tony performed that night for a room full of people who understood that they were celebrating more than just a new business. They were celebrating the end of a 40-year cycle of pain, guilt, and carefully nurtured anger. They were celebrating the Miuidulner discovery that enemies could become family when they finally chose honesty over pride. As Tony sang "The Way You Look Tonight" for the 3rd time in connection with the Marchetti family, he realized that this was how the song was always meant to be performed, not as entertainment, but as a reminder that love requires courage, forgiveness requires strength, and the truth, however delayed, always finds a way to heal the wounds that lies have left behind. Sal Marchetti, now a doting grandfather helping in his daughter's restaurant, had found peace not through revenge, but through understanding. Maria Rossetti Thompson had finally been able to honor Vincent's memory by helping the living find forgiveness. And Tony Bennett had learned that carrying guilt for 40 years was a choice, not a sentence, and that it was never too late to choose a different path. The wedding singer's secret had become the foundation for a new family tradition, one built on honesty instead of silence, forgiveness instead of vengeance, and the understanding that the most important performances happen not on stage, but in the quiet moments when people choose to love each other despite their flaws, their mistakes, and their shared history of pain. Vincent Marchetti never got to marry his schoolteacher or open his dream restaurant, but his memory had finally inspired others to choose truth over comfortable lies and love over fear. Sometimes the most beautiful songs are the ones that take 40 years to finish. And the most important concerts are the ones that happen in the spaces between what was planned and what actually occurred. The music played on, and finally, everyone could dance.